Hello, BookTube. Well, it's a bleak and barren Sunday, but it doesn't feel bleak and barren for a whole bunch of reasons. uh, Not least of which is that I effectively had mail today. So I thought I would do a. Ordinarily, I console myself on such Sundays with a tag. And even though I got mail, and even though I have a tiny little reason not to feel bleak or barren about anything, I thought I would do a tag anyway. I was tagged in one that was really neat by Richardson Reeds, and it's something that he made up originally. It's called the Weapons of Genre tag, signifying paying homage to the fact that weapons are a big part of genre fiction, and asks you just go through and name some weapons. So, it sounds very belligerent for a day of rest, but even so, it's a lot of fun. The first genre is thrillers and spy stories, and for this one, I'm afraid I'm going to break ranks and nominate a work of nonfiction by Sergei Plokhy. I'm sure I'm massacring that name. He's a Russian writer, and he did a book. I think it was last year called "The Man with the Poison Gun," which is about an assassin who had a specially made gun that delivered ampules of poison, and they shattered and left no trace behind, and his victims would die. He was a spy, a counterintelligence operative, and the book reads like fiction. It reads just wonderfully. So even if you're, or especially if you're not of a mind to nonfiction, find it at the library and give it a try. I bet you will like it. Uh, and if you want to, if you think you might want to give it a try, keep in mind right around the metaphorical corner is Nonfiction November, when I'm going to be among the chorus of booktubers who are enjoying the plenties of nonfiction, while the rest of you reread Harry Potter. We'll talk. Genre number two is historical fiction. And for this, I wanted to pick a novel that I've recommended on this channel before. It's The Journeyer by Gary Jennings, a big, fat, luscious historical novel about Marco Polo, who brings gunpowder to the Chinese and introduces its use tactically and in field work to the Great Khan, to Kublai Khan. And there are some scenes where we see that deployment, and they're incredibly done, incredibly exciting, including one in which the walls of a canyon are brought down on an army that is just cinematic in scope. What a book that is. Uh, Genre number three is Western novels, and for this I picked Lonesome Dove, Larry McMurtry's great epic Lonesome Dove. Uh, there's a scene in Lonesome Dove, you might remember it from the great miniseries, but it's a scene in which Augustus McCrae, one of our two heroes, has been run into a gully by a group of bandits, and they think that they are far enough away from him so that his Henry rifle cannot possibly hit them. But he has a gun sight on the weapon that is calibrated to tell him the level of elevation that he needs for the muzzle in order to get the bullet where he wants it to go. And he demonstrates his skill with that in the most direct way possible by plugging one of the bandits from an enormous distance away. So I picked that definitely, also as any chance I get to recommend Lonesome Dove. Then uh, Genre number four is fantasy stories, and for that I pick The Pastel City by M. John Harrison. A great fantasy novel that I think I've mentioned on this channel before. It's set in the city of Viraconium, which is the last of the afternoon cultures. It's would be wrong even to call it post-apocalyptic. Viraconium is so old that it doesn't remember its past. Doesn't even it's so old that time itself has grown tired and fractured in its streets and alleys, and it's just an amazing reading experience. All of the Viraconium novels are, and in Pastel City, there's a war between two queens, and it involves down at heels, seedy knights and a crazy dwarf who unearths working exoskeleton from the many multi-layered trash heaps of the advanced technologies of previous cultures, of previous eons of Viraconium. The knights have exotic technological weapons. The dwarf walks around in his exoskeleton for as long as it lasts. There are many weapons that can be unearthed in the junk piles out on the moors around Veraconium. So I'll pick that. And the next category is science fiction. And I'm going to stick with M. John Harrison. He wrote a science fiction novel called The Centauri Device. And the device in question is the weapon, which is a kind of organic, semi-sentient explosive, a gigantic bomb that can almost think on its own, and that can only be activated symbiotically by a Centauran. And there aren't any left, except for our main character, who's one half Centauran, and so might be able to do something with the bomb. It's, the idea of a sentient bomb is wonderfully mocked in the great movie Dark Star. I don't know if any of you have ever heard of it, but it's worth watching. Teach the bomb phenomenology. But it's done wonderfully in the Centauri Device. Then category 6 is nautical fiction, and I want to pick a novel that hasn't been written yet. An utter scandal. And the novel would be about the USS Constitution, Old Ironsides, the 1794 U.S. warship that is still on active duty and moored here in Boston. Rated 44 guns, but she bristled with guns, and she had live oak cross beams in her hull, so that shot that would ordinarily blast through normal planking just bounced right off. Hence her nickname, Old Ironsides. And incredible stories to tell of incredible naval victories, and a long desuetude that also has drama in it, and a row of personalities as captains that would do any novel fine. If one of you knows of a big historical epic novel about the USS Constitution that I've never found, feel free to sound off in the comments, because I'd love to read one, and if it hasn't been written, I'd like someone to write it. Then category number 7 is horror. And for this, I picked one of the only horror novels that I can actually stand, and that's Robert McCammon. His book Swan Song is actually unlike a lot of horror novels. Most horror novels take a very small focus on acting on the premise, I suppose, that all horror is intensely personal. So most horror novels take place in small towns or in cabins or in a room, and most objects of horror are relatively small. Ants. Things like that, or innocuous, like clowns or children. Swan Song is one of the rare examples of a horror novel where the scope is enormous. A world on the brink of actually a world engaged in thermonuclear war, and there's a weapon called the Talons in the first chunk of Swan Song that the President of the United States can authorize. That just basically blows everything up. If he thinks there's no hope, he can activate the Talons and guarantee that there's no hope. Just wipe out everything. I like the way McCammon's really good with description. His novel Wolf's Hour, about a werewolf who is heroic and fights against the Nazis, you should not miss. And he does a really good job describing the ultimate doomsday weapon. And then the last category, before I leave you on this bleak and barren Sunday, is mystery. And I'm going to bring us right around to the idea of an unconventional gun with The Adventure of the Empty House, the great Sherlock Holmes story in which Sherlock Holmes returns from the dead. The story opens with Dr. Watson giving deposition at a coroner's inquest. He's beaten. He's a defeated man. He's desperately unhappy because, as far as he knows, Sherlock Holmes is dead, died at Reichenbach Falls, and he's importuned by a hunched-over beggar who wants to sell him used books. And when the beggar makes his way into Watson's office and Watson turns his back for a minute, when he turns back, there's Holmes standing in front of him. And the inquest is about a murder, an unusual murder that took place in London, in which a man was killed in his study with no evidence of a weapon. And the gun turns out to be a very unusual air gun that's being used by Colonel Sebastian Moran, the second most dangerous man in Europe, a tiger hunter extraordinaire who it's a hyped up air gun that kills from a great distance and leaves no trace and can only be used by an expert marksman and huntsman. It's a humdinger of a story. You can be reread 80 million times, as I know firsthand, because I've reread it 80 million times. But that's it. That is the Weapons of Genre tag for my Bleak and Barren Sunday, which has been eventful, to say the least. But I'll go for now, and I'll see you soon. Thank you, BookTube.